Hello, everybody. I'm Saurabh, and I welcome you to this fireside chat on how should you approach deep tech on behalf of Hello Tomorrow and BCG. I'm sure all of you are busy, so without further ado, let's start. Hello Tomorrow and BCG have been building the deep tech narrative since 2016, and they are the most quoted reference on the deep tech Wikipedia page. This year, they are publishing a series of three reports on the topic. We have here with us Arno De La Tour and Massimo Potincaso, the two main authors of those reports. So I'm happy to have them both here to share their latest insights. A quick introduction of our speakers. A father of two baby girls, CEO of Hello Tomorrow, and author of several publications of deep tech, Arno holds a MSc in Agriculture Engineering and a PhD in Industrial Economics. He worked as a consultant at BCG before founding Hello Tomorrow, which is therefore his third child. Massimo is also an engineer, was until very recently partner and managing director at the consulting group, where he took part in launch of the Deep Tech Mission, BCG's Deep Tech practice. He is now 100% dedicated to Deep Tech as Hello Tomorrow's chairman of advisory board and running several projects related to investments in Deep Tech. Coming to our audience, today our audience consists of the noted corporations such as Nestle, JC Decor, Renault, Pierre Fabre, from almost over 30 countries attending this chat, and we would love to know some of the challenges you have been facing. Since this is a fireside chat, we are keeping the session open to questions and interjecting at any point of time. I will ask the most upvoted questions in the discussion here. Please use the questions tab to ask questions. I hand over the mic to Massimo now. Over to Massimo.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So let me just start giving you a bit of a context. And there's been a lot of talk about deep tech, and it has become a term which is very much in vogue. So let's frame the conversation for today and how this relates to corporate. Because when we talk about deep tech, we very often spoke about startups, but what is deep tech? And the one important thing for people to consider when we talk about deep tech is that when we talk about deep tech, we're not talking about deep technology, but we're actually talking about the different approach to innovation that allows and make fundamental innovation as a default and not as the exception. And what does it mean concretely, and how this looks like in terms of innovation? And it really starts with a big shift that is happening that people need to understand. And if you want, with deep tech, we're entering what I call the post-digital innovation wave. So we're bringing together bits and atoms, and this is a big difference compared to the previous wave. In the past 20, 30 years, we've been really focusing on digital and becoming more and more digital. And now we're entering this place where bits and atoms reinforce each other and can lead to very, very different set of innovation. But I think what characterizes deep tech are a few elements that are really important in all of these. The first one is that you really can go for fundamental innovation and not the incremental innovation. And this is something which is really important for corporates, because corporates have the tendency to really look for incremental innovation because this is something that is close and also less risky. You're not going to do, incremental innovation means that incremental failure in case you fail. But with deep tech, you have the possibility to go, and this becomes a bit of the default. And what is really important is that if you want to do this fundamental innovation, you really need to broaden the option space, and you need to have a problem that you're trying to solve. And this problem is really important because what is underlying this expansion of the option space are two main convergences. On the one side, of course, the barriers to innovation are becoming lower and lower when it comes to innovation today, and this is the foundation of deep tech. But the real forces behind this kind of innovation are two main convergences, and these two convergences are, in my view, really important when it comes to corporate, because this is some of the places where some of the innovation is not happening or getting lost within big corporate. And one of the convergence is the convergence of approaches. So we're seeing that with deep tech, we have science, engineering, and design coming together. Design is the problem orientation. Science is really what allows you to go deep, and engineering is what is constituting the bridge between the two. When the three comes together, then you can really solve big problems that were not solvable before, because usually you used to look at these in different approaches. And the other big convergence which is happening is at the technology level. And this is a little bit of the bits and atoms I was talking about. And you have very different dimensions. You have the cognition and computation dimension. You have the sensing and motion, so the robotics, automation, and matter is becoming and energy are becoming a very important element of the equation to innovation. So we have a very much expanding option space that allows you to do fundamental innovation, not incremental, through the two convergences. But what is happening is that we have a counter movement which is happening, which is on the one side expanding the option space. On the other side, what is happening is that the timelines are collapsing. And the reason for the collapsing of the timelines to get to these fundamental innovation is that we are applying to all of these convergences the design, build, test, learn cycle. The design, build, test, learn cycle is nothing new. It's something that has always been there. But what is happening because of these convergences and also the fact that the barriers and the platform are increasing, each of the steps of this design, build, test, learn cycle have a very different power. And you can apply generative AI for design. You can apply robotics and IoT for building and testing, generate more data. Through the more data, you can generate better learning, which leads to better design. And you can go through this cycle much more faster. So you can expand the option space and get there much faster. And the ultimate consequence of all of these is that we're making the impossible possible much faster than people would expect. And what we're seeing is that things that used to take 20 years are taking now 2 years. Things that used to take 2 years are taking now 2 months or 2 weeks. So this is something where companies have a difficulty to deal with, have difficulty in bringing together different technologies. There is still people thinking about digital, people thinking about engineering. We really need to bring and have this multidimensional approach toward innovation, and we need to apply this quick iterative cycle and leverage the power of digital to be able to do that.
And so, when you talk about deep tech like that, it's well, it's true. It's a new approach. It's a new innovation wave, but sometimes it can be a little bit scary. And I know that some companies and some people also in general have some trouble maybe to relate to deep tech and how they can leverage it. And actually, and maybe also another way to look at it is that it's also kind of the convergence. You talk about bit and atoms, but in the end, it's also the convergence of kind of the traditional R&D that many companies are very good at. We have here, I see in the list of participants, people working in the nuclear industry, in chemistry, in also food and agriculture. So of course, there is very important R&D capabilities and high-level scientists. But it's the convergence of this kind of hardcore R&D and digital, which is so it's also not in opposition. We don't oppose the deep tech to digital. It's more the convergence of traditional R&D and digital. And what it means is that for if we split the companies in, let's say, those who are very high that have a very high R&D intensity, like the one I mentioned before. It means that digital will be integrated not only to kind of find new business model, but really will be integrated with the business units, but also with the R&D. And that's the whole. I think that's the whole approach of deep tech, to manage to make this convergence between the different approaches, like traditional R&D and design thinking, agility related to digital, really work together in the same teams, in the same companies. And that's where the startups, of course, are very good because they start from scratch. But that's where it's a bit more difficult for big companies. If we take companies that are more around the software part, I think there are people from Google and Microsoft here. It's more looking at where will the convergence between atom and bits happen. And for example, Google with AlphaFold, they managed to increase drastically the efficiency of protein folding modeling. So it's a revolution in biotech. And Microsoft also are exploring what they can do in terms of business with biological data storage or biological computing. So whether companies start from more like traditional R&D or software, there is this convergence that needs to happen. And for companies that are, let's say, not in the hardcore R&D or in software, I think there is still the challenge to understand where their business will be affected. For example, meat production will definitely be affected by alternative proteins. So it might be the moment also to maybe not build some high R&D capacities, but at least understand what's going on, where and when it is going to affect your business, to make sure that you make the right move.
And I think, I know you're addressing a very important point. It's not about an alternative R&D. I think it's really bringing the pieces together. And this is one of the reasons why, to me, I cannot stress enough the importance of problem orientation. And if you ask me, ultimately, this is one of the biggest differentiators between startups and big corporate. Very often, the original problem to be solved gets lost into the broader corporate environment, and people tend to forget the fundamental underlying question and try to optimize at the margins, while startups are really starting with the problem. And what is core in this approach is really starting from the problem and looking at all the different tools that can help you to solve the problem. In the case of protein folding is, okay, we want to solve this problem, we want to predict it, let's use software, let's use AI to be able to do it. And digital is a very important component into this. It's just you need to bring it and, pardon the pun, but you need to fold it into the overall approach toward innovation. And this really consideration of use, really what is the problem that we're trying to solve, what are the tools that we have that are way more accessible than they used to be, is what is really driving this huge wave of achieving these. But I think what is really important, it tends to go a little bit under, is the importance of looking at the problem and reframing it and rethink it to address it in a different way. And one of my favorite examples is nitrogen fixation, which is basically plants need nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the biggest polluter indirectly, or one of the biggest causes of CO2 and greenhouse emissions. And one possible way to solve the problem is, okay, we want to optimize these and we want to make nitrogen production and ammonia production cleaner and more sustainable. Another way of solving this problem, and this is why the problem orientation is really important, is what if instead of producing nitrogen and shipping it around and distributing, which has also second and third order implication, what if we can design organisms to be able to fixate nitrogen directly on the plants? We don't have to produce nitrogen, we produce the organism and the organism do it. And this reframing of the problem and bringing together all the different pieces of technology to be able to address this problem is what is driving this kind of fundamental innovation.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Arnaud. So let me bring some numbers into this equation. Deep tech investments grew from 15 billion in 2016 to 60 billion in 2020. How do you explain this sudden jump in investments in this short period of time?
Well, I think that first, the digital wave, which was mostly driving investment, including in startups, is it's maybe not yet reaching a plateau, but let's say that the GAFAs of digital, they already exist. So now it's more about growing it and spreading existing models in the whole economy. And on the other hand, we have those emerging technologies that are starting to reach the market and concrete applications. Very big problem to be solved, for which those technologies can bring solutions. So in the end, this is a huge opportunity. And I think people want either to be the one building the next, the GAFA of deep tech, or at least having a piece of the cake. So yeah, that's my point of view. I don't know, Massimo, what do you think?
I think there are probably three elements to that. The first one is that we need to de-average, and the biggest driver in this rise has been AI and synthetic biology, if you want. This is one thing. So it's still very focused, and while this increase seems like a lot, it's still less than 10% of the overall investment. that is happening in technology. So the vast majority of the investment is still going toward digital. So we shouldn't forget it's increasing, but from a very small starting point. The second point is that the reason why this is happening is that this convergence we were talking about is making things possible now. So if you look at where synthetic biology was, let's say in 2012, 2013, or even 2015, it was really getting started. And now these convergences and having AI, having advancement in CRISPR or editing, next generation sequencing, and many other things are really completely changing the landscape. And things are now possible at the startup level that were not possible before. So I think it's a combination of those things. And the third component is that investor, and there is a more pressure to really address the fundamental problem that we are having as humanity, and deep tech is one of the best way to be able to address these issues. So there is also part of that is coming into this.
And it's true that even though it's growing really fast, it's still quite far from the potential it could reach. But that's the topic of the next report we're going to publish very soon. So I'm taking this occasion to promote a little bit this report. So don't hesitate. Don't feel free to reach out if you want to know more about this report.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo, again. I would shift the subject a little bit, and I would talk about. So we have known that startups led the digital wave, and big companies had really difficulties catching up this wave. This particular wave, the deep tech wave, basically is not only digital but very much accompanied by physical products. We have nuclear fusion plants, manufacturing plants, and many other capital investing industries coming out of this wave. What is the role of startups in this deep tech wave? Massimo?
I think Massimo, you became an expert of nuclear fusion. So because it's true that it's a crazy example. The fact that startups now are kind of leading the race here. Do you want to elaborate maybe?
Yeah, I think the physical component is a very important one. I mean, this goes a little bit along the lines of what we were discussing about making the impossible possible. And nuclear fusion is, for me, what epitomizes the power and the potential of deep tech, because we have a field that used to be a domain of states, not even company, states, and they're still working on nuclear fusion with ITER. And then on the other side, you have a startup that is working, claiming, and there are multiple, not only one, there are multiple with different approaches working on putting together. You can see the convergence in a very concrete example in which the big advancement that they did was not on the physics, but because they had materials that enabled high temperature superconducting materials that enabled different magnets, and the magnets enabled a better steering of the plasma, and they're applying this iterative process to be able to do this, and this is coming up. But I think what I like about this example, and particularly on the nuclear fusion, is that you can really see how those things are coming together. Is how do you need to solve the problem? So you have the problem, which is how do I get to energy producing, so net gain through nuclear fusion. But ultimately, the problem is I want to produce energy in the grid. And this is where you see the difference. Before, nuclear fusion was a scientific endeavor. Now it becomes a problem that I'm trying to solve and say, okay, how do I leverage nuclear fusion to put energy into the grid? And you have the different components coming together, and you really start seeing the importance of the engineering component into this. And I think what for me is really important about this deep tech wave is that with digital, you could come up, and you still can come up and have a new business model and eat the incumbent's lunch. With deep tech, there is a much better possibility of bringing together the strengths of the startup with the strengths of corporate, and really leverage this physical part, because corporate have the engineering capabilities, they have the go-to-market access, they have the capital that is necessary to be able to do so. So in an ideal world, you will bring together the strength and innovation power of the startup and the engineering and the go-to-market solidity of corporate. What often happens, unfortunately, is the opposite, is that we're bringing together the fragility of the startup with the bureaucracy of the corporate, and then this dies. So if you ask me what is one area where I wish a lot of development is less on the technology side, that is going to happen by itself, but is really how corporate learn how to deal with this wave of innovation. And we shouldn't forget that it took decades for the semiconductor industry to learn how to absorb this external innovation. It took 40 years for the biopharma environment to really learn how to deal with biotech and external innovation. So it's a process that is not easy, but we don't have this time. It's a huge opportunity for corporate to be able to learn how to operate in this spirit and understand the rules of the game while playing in deep tech.
You mentioned an example in nuclear fusion, and that's not. It's not a random example. It shows that really it's now entering in all industries. And when we think about the previous innovation waves and how startups were involved, it was a lot about around digital, where there was not much barrier to entry, and there was also not much risk just in terms of market. Also in biotech, especially medical biotech, where there was a clear process where corporates would buy startups in the clinical trial phase or just before. But now it goes well beyond those two well-proven domains. And it's nuclear fusion, but it's also, for example, building the first flying taxis. So Lilium Aviation, the winner of the Hello Tomorrow Challenge in 4 or 5 years ago, and now they exited through a SPAC at more than $2 billion, or 2 or 3. And it's the same also for satellite constellations to build cellular agriculture and alternative proteins. So there is not really one domain where startups cannot enter. And I think it's important to maybe ask also the questions, why is that happening? How comes that the barriers to entry that used to prevail don't prevail anymore? So I'm kind of asking myself the question. So sorry, Saurabh, if I'm doing your job, but I think that
go ahead, please.
that we need to notice that there is not really anymore any barrier to entry to perform cutting edge R&D. And that's true for digital, of course. You can rent huge computing power on the cloud. You can also use like TensorFlow from Google or IBM Watson, or you can find that as almost as a commodity. It's true also for hardware. Yes, everybody is aware of 3D printing to do cheap prototypes, but it's also true for biotech and for life science. And you can now edit and buy synthetic DNA on the internet. So there is, and when this is not enough, you can startups work with universities or big companies to fill in the gaps where they need more advanced R&D capabilities or infrastructure. So there is not really any barrier here. There is plenty of capital available. We've discussed the really growing investment, and
it could be more.
Yeah, it could be more. We definitely agree about that. But let's say that there is money, and for good projects, there is money. I think we of course we want more investment in deep tech, but a very good project they don't really have trouble to find money. So I think there is. I think the road is free, and again there are those big challenges to be tackled, and so of course startups are entering the race everywhere.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo. I just have one thing. So you pointed out that startups are leading even in the industries where we were not expecting them to be. And you touched upon nuclear fusion very broadly, but I would just, for the sake of audience, what about some examples from synthetic biology or in the manufacturing industry where making steel? Can you shed some light on that? On these sectors
I think
as
this
well?
is also this is one of the questions that I saw. What do you see in the next years? And I think if you ask me, the next big wave which is coming, it's one of the reports that we publish is about it's around nature co-design. I think this is something that people really need to understand. It's enabled by deep tech, but it has a set of characteristics that are really important. The first one is that for the first time we are in a position to leverage nature as an engineering manufacturing platform. This is a huge shift. You might say we've been partnering with nature, yes, but we've never been able to use it as an engineering manufacturing platform. This is a big shift because nature has been in business for billions of years. We're doing our best to try to get nature out of business, but it has been in business for billions of years. So we can really leverage a lot of optimization that has already happened. But this is not only the point, is that because we can do that, we can really operate at the atomic level, and we can do and build or grow stuff at the atomic level. And this has, as a second order consequence, a major shift that can happen in our in our civilization, if you want, or in our industrial tissue, which is the shift from exploitative to generative. Because we are being able to build or grow stuff at the atomic level, we can really, instead of being exploitative, which means, for instance, if you look at the petrochemical, putting energy to dig stuff out of the ground, put energy to refine it, and put energy to reassemble it and ship it, we can really use organisms to grow stuff at the molecular level. This is a huge shift because all of our economic and industrial tissue is built on this exploitative paradigm. And this is really a big shift. So if you want to summarize what deep tech is enabling over the next years, and this is what is very much needed, is a shift which is similar to the one that happened when we moved from being hunter and gatherer to farmer, to a place where instead of being hunter and gatherer of resources, we're becoming farmer of resources. It's just only that we're being farmer not at the macro level, so with plants and animals, but we're becoming farmer at the micro level in the sphere of organism, atoms, and molecules.
And Saurabh, you mentioned also biology and synthetic biology, and it's true that it's probably the most mature example of natural co-design because we are now quite good at using yeast or bacteria that we engineer to make them produce whatever we want them to produce, and at a large scale. And I think this is also a perfect example of the deep tech approach because it combines several technologies, so biotech, but also robotics to manipulate at a large scale efficiently. Also machine learning to analyze huge amount of data very quickly, and then kind of close the feedback loop by changing the design, so kind of almost instantly. And this is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So it used to be only, let's say, commercially viable in healthcare, this kind of biotech wave, because there is not really any limits in which we are willing to pay to save lives. But now that it's becoming cheaper, it's really disrupting also the food and agriculture markets. Kind of also soon the more like consumer markets with clothes and bags and so on, but deep tech really goes beyond, and natural co-design goes beyond only synthetic biology, because the same thing is also happening, for example, with material science, because we whether it is in terms of design, so to kind of do the model what material, what properties you want to have, and then kind of have a frame, like the definition of the properties you are looking for, and the same principle, so automatization of the lab work, but also using AI to analyze data very quickly and close the feedback loop. This can also be applied for material science, and this is what Kebotics, if I remember from the last Hello Tomorrow Summit, this is what they are doing.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo. Before we go ahead and talk about challenges that corporates have been facing while leveraging deep tech and the solutions that we can propose them, I'll take some questions from the audience. And there's this one question which has been upvoted from Laura. And the question goes something like this. How is the deep tech ecosystem reacting to the pandemic? Are we seeing new trends? Have investments shaped towards a specific area? How would you answer this?
I'll take a first stab at it. It has done many things. I think that it has reinstituted a confidence in science that was going away. And it was somehow, I wouldn't say the perfect timing, but the mRNA technology, I think we're underestimating the power of that technology, and it happened to be ready exactly in time for the pandemic. So I think that there is more awareness around the power of this kind of innovation. And if you want, mRNA is a perfect example of what we mean with deep tech innovation. You could say this is biotech, but I think what is really beautiful about the mRNA example is just that it really came from a problem point of view. It came out of a what if question. And it was just really coming from the idea, what if instead of injecting something into the body, we can write the code, i.e. the RNA, to have the body produce what we want it to produce. It's a complete paradigm shift, and it's a complete different way of framing the problem that led to this. And then you went through and really bring together the different technologies to be able to address these. And you use data, you use synthetic biology, and so on, and then you really scale it. And I think this is really one of the things that came out of the pandemic, is really this awareness about science, and also the proof that we can achieve things that were thought to be unachievable before.
I mean, it's true that we figured that we can't solve such big challenges that we're facing without science. I'm not that confident in the relation between science and society, but that's a whole discussion. But I think also what it brought in terms of something positive is all the public money and all the investment that are done to reboost the economy. It's also an opportunity to, in the end, to shift entire industries to new models, maybe more sustainable. And whether it is plastic recycling or even going away from plastic and from petroleum-based plastic completely, it's definitely we need breakthrough technologies. Same thing to stop climate change, for carbon capture, for example, or greenhouse gases emission reduction in general. So I think that's a big opportunity, and I think also that since many of the deep tech innovations, they look more on the long term, I don't think the pandemic had big effects. I think again, good projects, they still manage to get financed and to find customers.
Thank you, Arno. Thank you, Massimo. So there's a question in the audience which also resonates with our next subject, basically, and I will just iterate it here. I will just say it here. How can deep tech companies, it's from Hiran, how can deep tech companies overcome shortcomings in the ecosystem they reside? Related to this, if companies do not have a culture of R&D, how can they catch up in an immature ecosystem for deep tech?
Oh, this is the 1 million question. And this is why it is important that entities like Hello Tomorrow operate and really foster the ecosystem. But what is really important is that because of its complexity, when you operate in a deep tech environment, you really need to have multiple actors and stakeholders coming together. It's not a play where you can go in a garage and come up a few weeks later with a new code and you start a company. It takes longer. You need a deep understanding and so on. And you really need the whole ecosystem. You need the university, you need corporate. So I think the way corporate needs to embrace these, I think there are many, many important dimensions to this, but there is one very important thing that corporate needs to learn when operate and work on the deep tech ecosystem, is a complete shift in mentality from the zero-sum game to growing the pie. And what I mean by that is that the normal default mentality of a corporation is I want the biggest slice of the pie. And it's not only corporation, it's all of us. That's the way we have been trained. And when you operate in an ecosystem environment, you need to completely switch the way you approach these and say, actually, you know what? I want to grow the pie, and then my slice is going to become bigger by that. And this is the right way to approach these. And you need to have a very different way and counterintuitive way. Some instances you might want to collaborate with your competitors. You want to have multiple options open. You want to first start thinking about what can I bring to the ecosystem instead of thinking how can I get the most out of it. So it's a very different way of operating. And corporate always think, okay, why should I do it? What's in for me? And what's in for you is that the pie is going to grow, and then you're going to get the biggest slice of the pie.
And I think on top of that, one of the challenges corporates have when engaging with new ecosystem is that they do not always want to share their key challenges or what they are working on because it seems too confidential, for example. But if they do not do that, they are never going to engage with new ecosystems. And it's true that they need to engage with new ecosystem, whether it is to find missing technologies, missing pieces of the product they want to build, or work with startups that are more closer to the customers, or just more generally engage with new value chains, new ecosystems if they want to change also the business model. So yeah, definitely being more open to share what they are working on, and then also you said it's not a zero-sum game, but I think also they need to be clear about what they are bringing, and also realize that what corporate can bring to startup, it's not like just a nice event, a little bit of visibility and a $10,000 cash prize, because this is not worthless, but almost for startups. I think the most important thing is to bring business, because for them it's also a proof for investors, for example, that they have some traction and that their business model is viable. This is also an opportunity to test their solution in a real environment if it's B2B startups. It's way better than visibility and kind of short-term cash prize. And I think in this perspective, I don't know if the term is venturing clients, but in the end, being a customer for the startups, but having this first phase, of course, of de-risking before going to traditional procurement. And this first phase of de-risking can be I don't know, your own accelerator or incubator. It can be running an innovation challenge. Yes, different formats, but in the end, with always the same goal, making sure that you identify a clear use case to work with the startups, and making sure also you systematically de-risk both the business case and the technical aspects together, so that then the business and the traditional procurement can take place. But it means also involving the business from the beginning to make sure that there will be a follow-up.
Thank you, Arnaud. Let me... Yeah, Massimo, please.
Just one small point about what just Arnaud said. At times they don't even have the problem that they're bringing. So they're too incremental in what they're doing. And sorry if I keep repeating myself, but if you want to contribute to the ecosystem, you need to come with the right problem to the ecosystem, because if you're trying to optimize a sub part of a sub process in a sub piece, this is not going to be really relevant. But if you have the right framing, the right problem, this is going to trigger the ecosystem to contribute and work to solve this. So I think that the problem framing part and having the right use cases or problems is really, really, really important in this.
Thank you, Massimo. So let me go a step back. So this is very clear that deep tech is the very promising innovation wave. Not only this is shaping narrative, but also concrete projects and bringing businesses to the market. But many challenges remain for corporates and companies while leveraging deep tech. What are these challenges? Can you talk a little bit about it, and then we jump to the solutions of it? Meanwhile, Arno and Massimo are talking about these challenges. We are putting a poll in the poll section about these challenges, and we would love to have your inputs we would love to have the inputs from the audience.
I think we mentioned already two challenges. Massimo just mentioned the need to frame the problem right and to start from clear priorities that are also aligned with the corporate strategy. We discussed about the issue of connecting with new ecosystems. So then what are the other challenges that corporates are facing? I think that maybe one of them also is to combine the R&D, the traditional R&D capabilities and digital capabilities, because that's something that startups can easily do because they start from scratch. And I was looking, for example, at yesterday at a job post from Lilium Aviation. So they're hiring, I think it was a digital product owner or something like that, or digital product designer. And basically you see that they hire people that need to have both the engineering and digital competencies, and they will work at the intersection with the infrastructure of the airport they need to build for the flying taxis, and also the service business model that they want to have. So they build their company around this model, this bits and atom model. So it's kind of easier. So it's a little bit more difficult when you start from a very advanced scientific capabilities, like in the chemistry industry or in the nuclear industry, and to combine that with maybe a digital department that you built, but in terms of culture, of I don't know, processes, organization, I think it's a challenge to make people work together.
Massimo, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think it gets very often underestimated. But the great Donella Meadows, when she was talking about system, she was at the biggest leverage point in a system apart from paradigm shifts is mindset. And I think this applies very much to deep tech and big corporate. It really requires a different mindset that you have when you deal with it, and really freeing yourself from your heritage and what you've been doing, and really trying to optimize things, but really try to rethink, go back and ask the fundamental questions around it. And also not only looking at, what could be possible, how can we make it possible, and really trying to solve something concrete. I think it's really important. You have some of it in a corporate, but it's very spread across. So bringing these together and having this become constantly the mantra of the company is fundamental and really important. This was not necessary 10 years ago, where you needed states to be able to work on nuclear fusion, but now that startup can really do this stuff that before that was only for lab researches. Then you need to embrace this mindset and start dealing with it. The same way we've been saying, you need to start thinking digitally and differently. This is the next wave. Is really, okay, how can we really fundamentally question everything, and how can we find the pieces to be able to bring this new future together and have the boldness to be able to do it? Because and this goes back to the cultural pieces, that in a company, if you innovate a little bit, you're going to be rewarded. If you fail because you try to achieve something which was, then you're not going to be rewarded for that. And I think this is preventing many companies to really reap the rewards of it. And it's part of the mindset and the culture that they have there, I would say.
And you talk about culture.
And the other, and the last point that I would add. We always talk about what companies don't have. And this has been true for digital, because we were coming from this new wave and this was something that was coming. But let's focus on what companies have and corporate has for deep tech, which is the scale, the go-to-market, and really how can you question yourself and go outside and look and be open and try to integrate what is outside into what you have and make the best of both worlds. I think this would be really, really, really powerful.
So Saurabh, you shared the Paul, how many answers do you have? Because we maybe for the next step, if we need to deep dive into some of the challenges and maybe share, because we have only 15 minutes left.
Yes.
If we need to give some concrete examples of how we can solve
Exactly,
them.
Arno. So the two top votes are for hard to move away from legacy business model. So the question was, what are the biggest challenges for corporations leveraging deep tech? And the two top are hard to move away from the legacy business model, and the second one is difficulties to connect with deep tech innovation ecosystems. The third is risk aversion.
The first one, it's a bit challenging. I mean, I think that's also a problem that is not only true for deep tech, but that's a more general problem. If a company has been focusing on building products or molecules or whatever, how to become, for example, a service company. I'm not sure of the. I think this was the trickiest question, so it's a shame. It's the first one that have been picked. What we've seen is that seem to work, but it's to build maybe new business units that are still very much connected to the rest of the company, so that it doesn't become like an internal monster, but that have the freedom to operate without the bureaucracy of the rest of the company. So that can be a way maybe to initially at least to test in an agile way new types of business, and so that's one model. I would be happy to hear your opinion, Massimo, and maybe also, I don't know if some people in the crowd want to take part, want to give some testimonies. You can, yeah.
I think this is a classical question, and this goes back to the innovator's dilemma, but I think underlying behind this question is more of a misunderstanding, let me put it this way, that we very often have, because we put very often startup and corporate at the same level, and they're not. And this is something that Steve Blank loves to repeat to people. He says it's not that a corporate is a big startup and a startup is a small corporate. They're two completely different animals. One is looking to find its own business model, and the other one is there to optimize the existing business model. And it's intrinsic in its raison d'etre to really continue what they're doing. So I think that, to go back to my point about the mindset, and really this questioning the mindset is really, really important to be able to overcome these barriers for corporate, to be able to do it, and this openness. And going back to the original problem, I think this is, if you look at also at what Amazon says, you have a problem when the proxy becomes the substitution for what you're really trying to do. Processes become the substitution for the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And I think going back to really the fundamental question that the company are trying to serve becomes really, really, really important. And if you reframe these, then you are necessarily open to a different kind of innovation, I would say. So don't think that a corporate is a big startup. A corporate is something different. Question the underlying assumption behind the corporate, and then you will be able to reap the rewards of deep tech innovation. That's the way I would formulate it.
I think the second one we covered it.
It's super easy. Just join the Hello Tomorrow community. This is the way you get to.
But yeah, no, it was being clear about what you can bring, being clear about what you want to focus on, involving the right people in your organization to make sure that the program you will launch, whether it is an innovation challenge, and yes, definitely we did like dozens over the last years, or if you want to create your own accelerator, make sure that businesses are involved so that there is a follow-up with the startup. It's not just a nice event. The third one I see, there are two are ex aequo, at least. It's risk aversion. So the fact that culturally it's hard to take like big leap of faith, and the fact that there is more the fear to face the criticism from the rest of the company to fail than to reward the benefits. And the other one is the difficulties to move beyond the proof of concept, whether it is internally or with startups. So I can start with the difficulty to move beyond the proof of concept. And by the way, you can still vote because you can still vote if you want. Sorry.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo. We have a lot of questions here, so let me take a few of them. And immediately after this question, I would like to get somebody from audience, maybe Thomas, to come and share his version of corporate challenges and the way he thinks solutions can work for this. But let's take one question here. So this is from Angelo. Why do you think the term deep tech exploded, considering that managers and companies have always been concerned about innovation and R&D? What do you think is the most unique challenge of this current deep tech boom?
Sorry, I didn't get the first sentence, which was the most important, I think.
Why do you think the term deep tech exploded, considering that managers and companies have always been concerned about innovation and R&D?
My point of view is that I think that's what we discussed at the beginning of this session. I think it's becoming clear that it's not only a question of new technologies and kind of the next field of R&D that companies would pursue, but this is really a new innovation wave and a new approach. And I think this term deep tech is crystallizing this idea, and this is kind of after the digital wave, the next wave that government, companies, investors want not to miss. As in the 90s, you didn't want, or in the like 20 years ago, you didn't want to miss the digital wave and internet. I think that's this is this idea.
I think, Sarah, there are two things here. On the one side is the fact that there's been a little bit of fatigue. It's a bit of a reaction, so that you had a lot of very smart people, particularly in Silicon Valley, but not only, just realizing, okay, am I really spending all my brain power to optimize the time that people are spending on a page or the amount of clicks I get on a banner, versus, okay, I want to solve really the fundamental issues. And the fact that deep tech, the way we are looking at it and as a form of innovation, brings together bits and atoms, and therefore allows you to solve some of the pressing issues that we have. I think this has been playing a very important role. It would be an interesting analysis to do, but really see the surge in terms of use of deep tech and climate change or sustainability. I think they go probably hand in hand. So I think it's a mix of those things, and deep tech is a proxy to basically utilize this innovation way to redo the world for the better. That's what I hope it is the case.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Arnaud. So we have here Thomas Morel from JCDecaux. And Thomas, for the lack of time, we give you 1 minute to talk about your challenges and the solutions. Is that okay?
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I think in terms of deep tech, the challenges is not only the tech itself, but it's really to find the right technology and then to find the right concept at the right use. For instance, JCDecaux, we're providing services for free to the city and generating revenue by selling advertising. So when you take the bus shelter, we had maybe a few years ago a request from the brands just to put a display inside the bus shelter. Why do they need a display? Just to be because you need a display because it's a digital time and everything. But for the public, for people who are waiting on their bus shelter, maybe sometimes the display was not a good solution because having a touch display is not easy to use with gloves or depends. So I think deep tech is a real need because we need new technology, we need deep tech, but we need to aggregate and to take the tech and to move it into a realistic concept that people are able to use and easy to use. If it's only technology part, this won't work. So I think it's a balance between pure tech and right use.
Thank you,
And
Thomas.
Thomas, thank you. Sorry, I wanted just to thank you, because this is something that is very dear to my heart. As Arnaud knows, I'm really fighting against the fact that people talk about deep technology, because there is no such a thing like a deep technology. All technologies, I wouldn't say are created equal, but you can have something which is emerging and newer, something which is older, but it's the use that you make of technologies that really create the innovation. And that's why there was also one of the questions was, what are more regular technologies versus deep tech? It's not a comparison. We're talking about an approach toward innovation in only it can be a very old technology that you bring together. And one very good example is NVIDIA GPUs. They were not created for this, but they're really boosting AI because they happen to be the right processor to be able to do it. So it's really about the problem that we're trying to solve and the technology we bring together to solve that problem. I think this is really what makes the deep tech innovation approach.
Thank you, Tom.
And this is indeed what makes it probably a little bit different from kind of the more traditional R&D. And every time we organize a workshop for a client, or we frame an innovation challenge, we try as much as possible to bring in people from other business units or from marketing, and also, if possible, to bring in clients. And it's important indeed to have this broad view and to make sure that we focus on the right use case and the right problem, and not just to develop a technology for the sake of it. But it's also important to do it from the beginning, to make sure that, let's say, those key stakeholders will be onboarded when it comes to scaling the project, to bringing it to the markets. And here, of course, all the stakeholders would be required.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Thomas, for this amazing testimony. We have 2 minutes left, and there is just one last question that we can take, and we will wrap up this session. This is from Christina. From your observations, experience, do you think corporates are willing to embrace fundamental innovation? Are deep tech startups taken seriously, or they remain a curiosity at the edges?
The question is not for me if they want, or if they have to. There is no other piece, otherwise they're going to become obsolete. So that's the way I see it, if you ask me. But I'm very bold on deep tech. So.
But I would say that they are taken seriously, from what I see. I mean, but it's also because I think the digital wave show that new companies need to be taken seriously,
I agree. We have a lot of questions here, but for the lack of time, I do not think that we can take any more questions. But if it's okay, I would rather take one cliche question to wrap up the session. Is that okay, Arnaud, Massimo?
Sure.
So this is from Gael, and he is asking US versus Europe landscape question. Most of the innovation waves end up maturing in US. How about the deep tech wave? Where does Europe stand in this?
In 10 seconds, not great, but it's not lost, I would say. I think that we have, and we always claim to have, scientific excellence, and that's true. But the mindset, like being able to take risk, or at least to make big leap of faith, that's not something that is very European.
No, as one VC told me, Massimo, in the US, entrepreneurs, scientists, they grow on trees, which is not true, but in Europe, they don't. I think we have a chance. We have great scientists. We need to make out of those great entrepreneurs.
Okay, with this, I would thank our speakers. Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Thomas, for joining this session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anoop, for behind the scenes managing this webinar. We would be in touch. Be a part of our community. Join the core for the corporate leaders. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.